Assalamu alaikum everyone, this is Emin Nazir and welcome to Knowledge Realm. So in the previous video we studied the Anglo-French Wars. We studied the King William's War, the War of League of Augsburg. King's William War is also called the War of League of Augsburg. Then we studied the Queen Anne's War, then we studied the King George War. We studied all these wars, and 7 Years' War, that is also called French and Indian War. This is also one of the Anglo-French wars that were fought between the French people of North America and the English people of North America. This war, 7 Years' War, this is a very important war, so we decided to discuss this in another separate lecture. So today we're going to discuss this 7 Years' War, or we should say French and Indian War in North America, that started in 1754 and ended in 1763. We would discuss this war today in detail. So stay focused and let's get started. 7 Years' War, or French and Indian War, was the last major conflict between English and French people in North America. Now this 7 Years' War, this was also called First World War. Some scholars they say that this was the actual First World War. Why? Because at that time people were fighting in Europe, India and North America. So we can say that three continents of the world were engulfed in war. So this is the reason that this is also called First World War. But that's not our scope today, and we would not discuss the war in Europe or in India. We would just focus on the French and Indian War in North America. So French people and English people were fighting in North America, and France made alliance with Spain and fought against British and Prussia, and the North American theater of the war was called French and Indian War. Now this is another important detail. The war in the whole world at the time was called 7 Years' War. But the North American theater of that war was called French and Indian War. So we would call this war French and Indian War today, because we are going to study the North American theater of that war. Then French and English forces, they fought amongst each other and they made their alliances with the native people of America. French made coalition with Wabanaki Confederacy. This confederacy was very important. It composed of 5 tribes of Native Americans, and English were in alliance with Iroquois. British won the war actually and became the only colonial masters of America. So this was a brief introduction of this French and Indian War. So what was the conflict between these two colonial powers, between French people and English people in North America, and what was the apple of discord? What happened at the time that led to this long 7 Years' War? Well, it was actually a conflict over territory. It was a conflict over a river valley, and it was the Ohio River Valley. Now this area right here, you can see on the map, this area was a disputed territory. Both the rival powers, the colonial powers, England and France, both the powers claimed this area. France said that this area belongs to us, and English said that now this area belongs to us, and they had their arguments over this claim, and they were fighting over this area. So Pennsylvanian traders who were English, and here somewhere here was Pennsylvania, it's not mentioned on map, but somewhere here was Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvanian traders actually started expanding their settlements in this area, and this area was disputed. French people said that this area belongs to us, and English was saying that no, this area belongs to us, and English people started expanding their settlements here. So in 1749, the English traders were ordered to retreat to eastern slopes of Appalachian Mountain. The governor of France, it said that move back to your place, and this area is ours and you do not belong here, so you should move back. But nobody listened to him. So in 1752, French governor applied force, and the important British colonial trading center at Pickawillany was destroyed. Here is Pickawillany. In 1752, it was destroyed by French forces at the behest of the French governor. Now, this was actually an effort to oust the English people from this area, and this was an effort to take over this area. Now, French people did this. They tried to oust the English people from this area. But afterwards, things got worse, and the French people started persecution of English traders here. In this area, the French people and their Native Americans allies, they started persecuting English traders. They started slaughtering English people. Now, this was the thing that irritated the New England colonies, and they started saying that now these people here, French people, are killing our people, so we should retaliate, and we should do something, and we should react now. So this was the main conflict between French and English, the Ohio River Valley conflict. Both the rival powers claimed this valley, and this was the valley that led to this long 7 Years' War. So to strengthen the hold in this disputed territory, French people started building their forts in this area. They built their fort from Lake Erie to River Ohio. You can see this here on the map. This is Lake Erie, and French people started building their forts. These all are the forts of French people. So George Washington was sent to French people to warn them. He was sent to Fort Lebeuf. Here you can see this is French Fort Lebeuf, and George Washington was sent to this place because he was sent to warn French people. He was sent to say this, that do not expand in this area because this area is disputed territory. This would lead to war between French and English people. But French people were not ready to listen to George Washington, and they kept on building these forts because they wanted to strengthen their hold in this disputed area, and they wanted to take over this disputed area. Then in 1754, French built Fort Duquesne. Here you can see on the map, here is Fort Duquesne, and they built this fort to strengthen their hold in this area. Then Washington was compelled to stop French by using force. At first, he warned French people, they did not listen. Then Washington, who was a young commander of the army of English people, he was compelled to use force. So he fought a battle with French people. And in this battle, I don't know, he or some other person, but in this battle, a very important commander of French army, Joseph Colonel de Jumonville, he was killed. Now this was a very serious thing, and this was a thing that infuriated French people. George Washington actually he built a fort, Fort Necessity. He built this fort, and he was living in this fort with his army, and French people, they retaliated on the death of their commander, Colonel Jumonville. They retaliated on the death of their commander, and they descended upon Fort Necessity because Washington and his people were in Fort Necessity. They descended on this fort and they besieged this fort. Now Washington was compelled to surrender. So he surrendered and he returned to Virginia. Now this was a very embarrassing thing for the people of England. Washington returned to Virginia, and this thing led to a war between French and English people. Then both these colonial powers started fighting in this area, in the disputed area of Ohio River Valley. They started fighting in this area. Now the first clashes were won by French. So this is how the war started in North America. So viewers, I've mentioned this in the previous slide that first clashes were won by French people. But how? What was their strength in North America, and how they succeeded in defeating English people in the first clashes? French were greatly outnumbered by British people. They were only 60,000 and British were more than 2 million. Still, French succeeded in the first clashes in this French and Indian War. How did this happen? What was their strength? Well, their strength was their coalition with the Native Americans. I have explained this several times in the previous lecture, in the lectures of colonization, that French people made good trade relations and friendly relations with the Native Americans. They did not expel any Native American from their territory. They did not try to control Native Americans. They did not challenge their religion. They did not persecute any Native Americans. Rather, they made friendly relations. They made trade relations with the French people. They made good relations with Wabanaki Confederacy of Native Americans. Now, this Wabanaki Confederacy was the main and very important confederacy of 5 tribes of Native Americans. So majority of Native Americans were at the side of French people. So these Native Americans fought with the French people against British. And another thing that contributed to the strength of France was the unity in their colonies. French people were not disunited. French people were united, and they fought this war with Native Americans. So this was the strength of French people in America. Now, what was the weakness of English colonies at the time? Well, first of all, English colonies were divided at the time, and they got the support of Native Americans. It is true that some Native Americans were at the side of English also, like Iroquois. Iroquois, Catawba, and Cherokee, these were the tribes that were fighting at the side of English people. These people sided with English and they were fighting against French. But their strength was not as much as the strength or support of Wabanaki Confederacy for French. They were few in number, and their support was not as much as the support of Wabanaki Confederacy for French. So another weakness of English colonies was the disinterest of King George II at home country. King George II was ruling the England Empire at the time in Europe, and he also did not show interest in this war. He said that, okay, now this is the war of Americans, so Americans should fight this war and we would not intervene and we would not support, and this is their war, so they should fight this war. The people of English colonies, they sought help, they sought assistance from the mother country, the British Empire in Europe, but King George II, he was indifferent towards these people and he showed disinterest. So this was the weakness of English colonies, and this was the reason that French people won the first clashes that were fought between the French and English people. So viewers, in 1757 the war took a new turn and British people started winning the battles. But how did this happen and who was behind this? Well, the newly appointed British Prime Minister William Pitt was behind this. William Pitt became the Prime Minister of Britain in 1757 and he completely altered the British policy of fighting the war. But why he did this? Well, the views of William Pitt for the American colonies were different, and he believed that if English people want a strong English empire in Europe, they should strengthen their American colonies. He believed that we can extract raw materials, we can extract resources from American colonies to strengthen the English empire in Europe. So he believed that we should strengthen the American colonies and we should invest in this war and we should fight this war and we should do whatever we can to win this war. Then he tried to convince the King of England at the time. He tried to convince the parliamentarian of England at the time, and he brought around these people and he sought permission from these peoples and he started investing in the war. He sent English troops to fight war in North America and he borrowed money also to finance the war. He said in the Parliament of England at the time that you give me money and I will make sure that English people win this war in North America, because this thing will pay us in the future and we will be able to generate revenue from American colonies. This was his belief, and this is how he brought around all the people of England. And he started investing in the war. Then another thing, a very important thing that British Prime Minister William Pitt did, he actually strengthened the navy of Britain. He increased the naval strength of Britain. And by increasing this strength, he blocked the sea route of France to Canada. What difference did this make? He blocked this sea route. Now Canada was not able to import troops and food from France that was in Europe. British Navy was very strong at the time and he blocked this sea route. Now this thing led to a situation of famine in France. The French people who were in America, the French colonies, they could not import food, they could not import the troops to fight war. So this thing actually dwindled the strength of French colonies in America. And this was a thing that contributed to the strength of English people. English colonies had already ample food and they did not starve, but French people, they faced almost famine when their coasts were blocked by English warships. So this is how the British Prime Minister William Pitt changed the course of action, and this is how William Pitt strengthened the English colonies and weakened the French colonies in America. Then viewers, in June 1758, the British won their first great victory at Louisburg near the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. You can see here on the map here, this is Louisburg, and the British won this battle here in 1758. Then in November 1758, General John Forbes, he captured Fort Duquesne and named it after William Pitt. After 1758, this fort was called the Fort William Pitt. Here on the map you can see in 1758, the General John Forbes, here I should mark this in yellow, John Forbes attacked this Fort Duquesne. This fort was built in 1754 by the French people, and in 1758 the General John Forbes, he attacked this fort and he captured this fort. Now this was another victory of British in North America. Then British fought Battle of Quebec in September 1759 and General James Wolfe conquered Quebec. Here was the Quebec. This was the main city of French colonies in North America, Quebec. It was conquered by General James in 1759. Then, with the fall of Montreal in September 1760, the French lost their last foothold in Canada. Here is Montreal city. Now, these two cities were the main city of French Empire in North America, Quebec and Montreal. In 1759, General Wolfe, he conquered Quebec, and in 1760, General Forbes conquered Montreal. And with the fall of Montreal, the French lost their last foothold in Canada. This is how British defeated French people in America. And this thing led to the end of the French and Indian War. Now this was a very interesting story, and I hope that all of you also enjoyed this, because when I was studying this, I enjoyed this because I enjoy history. Then viewers, in 1763, Treaty of Paris was signed between the two rivals, France and Britain. Treaty of Paris marked the end of the war in 1763. France, who was defeated by British people, ceded Canada to Britain, and Britain got a vast territory as a result of this war. All this territory you can see on the map. All this territory, this was ceded to Britain by French people, because French people, they lost the war. This yellow is the British claims. And Spain, who had joined France in the war, it also ceded Florida to Britain. Now, Florida was the first colony settled by Spain in America. When we were studying the discovery and colonization of America, we studied this, that Florida was the first colony settled by Spain in North America, and at that time it was named St. Augustine. So keep this in mind, this is very important. Then France disappeared from the continent as a political and military power. Then all along the Atlantic seaboard, all along this area, British had no colonial rivals. Now British ruled this area. British was the only colonial master at the time after this 7-year war. So this is how British ousted French people from North America. This was a very interesting story. Now this is the end of this video here. I hope all of you enjoyed. This was interesting, and I hope all of you got what I was trying to explain here. I tried to make things very simple and easy for all of you. This was the French and Indian War in North America. So thank you so much, and don't forget to like this video, don't forget to comment on this video, and don't forget to subscribe the channel Knowledge Realm.